All right, good morning. In my last Stephen King review for The Dark Tower 6, I said maybe I would talk about cosmology, Stephen King's cosmology in the Dark Tower universe versus ancient Christian cosmology, and really kind of the ancient worldview. So we're talking about the Dark Tower. It's now been mentioned several times throughout this series, which I'm not a fan of, by the way, but I do want to talk about the cosmology. And cosmology is the cosmos. It's the way that we view the universe. Okay, so in Stephen King's Dark Tower cosmology, the Dark Tower is the central thing. And actually, it's the beams that hold the tower up that is the center of the cosmos. It holds everything together, his multiverse. All right. And this whole idea of the tower, now, several times now it's been mentioned that there is possibly a deity, a god, that lives in the top of the Dark Tower. And this is really kind of an ancient worldview. Now, in order to understand the tower, what the tower is and what the tower is all about, you got to go back to the biblical narrative, okay, of creation in the Bible, my old beat up Bible here. I'm not going to get into this right away, but I want to talk about towers for a minute as artificial mountains, and the idea of God or gods living in mountains. So if you're reading, for instance, something like ancient Greek mythology, the idea of the gods of Mount Olympus, that's where they live, is in a mountain. If you read the book of Enoch, which is an extra biblical text, did not make it into the Christian canon, it says that there are a group of fallen angels, they actually call them the Watchers, that live in Mount Hermon. And Mount Hermon does appear in the biblical text as well. So you'll see this thing about the gods or God, because I don't believe in other gods, okay? I mean, little g gods, yes. Big G gods, there's only one. So the idea of God living in a mountain, in fact, even in the Bible, when Moses encounters God in the account that's given in Exodus, the 5 books of the Torah make up the Tanakh. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In Exodus, when he encounters God, it's the burning bush. And from the burning bush, the Lord, speaks to him and says his sacred name is I am that I am. Now, I'm not going to speak it, but it does read differently if you're reading in the Hebrew text compared to what you're reading in the Septuagint, where in the Septuagint, the rendering would be I am the one who is. Ego, ami, ho'am. So they are different. They're different. And I'm going to have to talk briefly about the Septuagint. But I want to get to the first time that we see a tower in the Bible. It's in the book of Genesis, and the whole idea of building a tower. Now, this is where the nations get scattered, where all of humanity is as one. And if you read that account, it happens in the plain of Shinar, okay? And we have this character named Nimrod, who is building a tower. He says, come and let us build a tower. I'll see if I can actually find it. Okay, so Genesis 11. It says, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain, the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. They said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So I want you to recognize here something that's going on. What they're doing is they're using technology. to build a tower. But in fact, what a tower is an artificial mountain. So we're not thinking of this as being a tower like you would see a tower like the Empire State Building in New York City or the Sears Tower in Chicago. Thinking more of like a ziggurat, okay, like it's kind of a tiered or a stepped tower. You can actually find one of these. Now it's interesting because in the Genesis account, when we have and the next figure that we're going to encounter after the Tower of Babel incident, where the nations are scattered by God, is we get introduced to Abram, who will have his name changed to Abraham. But what it says is that Abraham is living in Ur of the Chaldeans. Okay. Now there is actually one of these ziggurat structures that is in Ur, which today is located in what is modern day Iraq. You can actually go and find pictures of this ziggurat online if you're interested. It's this ziggurat in Ur. But what's also interesting is that what these ziggurats have been associated with, and this is getting back into the Stephen King, the tower thing, where he's saying that a God, that Roland expects to see a God in a room in the top of the tower. Well, this is what these ziggurats were for. They were for religious rites and rituals. Now, what's interesting about them is that we find ziggurats, these pyramidal structures, not only in the Middle East, but we also find these pyramidal structures in South America. Okay, the Mayans. Now, these are disparate cultures that had no contact with each other at all. The Mayans built these pyramids as well. They're ziggurats, and they used theirs for sacred worship rites as well. The idea is that a god or a deity dwells in the top of the tower. And that's what Nimrod was trying to do in Genesis 11, was build an artificial mountain, okay, so that he could trap essentially the deity inside of it, to make the gods or God do what you want him to do. Now, talking a little bit about this, of course, if you watch the History Channel, they're going to tell you the reason why these disparate cultures all have these pyramids is because of aliens. The aliens did it, man. That is not what ancient Christianity teaches. Okay, so if we go back to the first apology of Justin Martyr here, right? And by the way, you can find this online and read it for free. Now, Justin Martyr lived approximately between 180 and 165 AD, and he's an early Christian apologist. Now, he was a philosopher, so we call him Justin the Philosopher. He's also known as Sir Justin Martyr. He's not one of the apostolic fathers because he's a 2nd century Christian. When you're talking about the apostolic fathers, these are saints that actually knew or lived during the lifetime of the apostles, people that would have maybe have met Peter, James, John, all the apostles that would have had knowledge of them. We're talking about Clement of Rome. We're talking about Ignatius of Antioch, St. Polycarp of Smyrna, St. Barnabas. Actually, if you want to read the text that they written, you can read those. Like First Clement. We know First Clement is actual, legit, written by Clement of Rome. In the 7 epistles of St. Ignatius of Antioch, okay, he wrote 7 letters while he was on his way to be executed for the Christian faith. He was fed to lions in Rome and eaten alive. But Justin Martyr's later than that. But he talks about the gods, okay? Because he's speaking to a pagan culture that believes in, well, I don't know if they believed in Zeus, but they believed in Juno and, Minerva and stuff. So these are the Romanized names of the Greek gods. And what he says is that they are the demons. They're demons. They're fallen angels. This is consistent with the biblical text. We have the psalm that says the gods of the nations are devils, or the gods of the nations are demons. Okay, they're fallen beings. But one of the things that Justin talks about here in chapter 14 of this is how the demons, the devils, misrepresent Christian theology. It's a very interesting early text if you want to read it. But I want to get back into this whole idea of God's living in mountains. So it's not, we're getting back to aliens. So what's the explanation isn't that it's aliens. Okay, it's actually a passage from Deuteronomy. Now, this text in Deuteronomy is going to read different than in the Septuagint than it does here in the biblical narrative. So in Deuteronomy chapter 32, it talks about the scattering of people. And here we go. Again, Deuteronomy 32. We'll jump down here to verse 16. We're talking about God. They provoked him, speaking of God, to jealousy with strange gods, with abominations, to provoke they him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers fear not. So this would be the explanation of things like Baal. In fact, when we see Elijah confronting the prophets of Baal, they're on top of a mountain, Mount Carmel. Okay, so again, gods of the mountains. And in this passage in Deuteronomy 32, see if I can actually find it. All right, so Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, it says, when the Most High, speaking of God, the Creator God, the uncreated God, the eternal God, when the Most High divided the nations, their inheritance. Okay, when did this happen? Well, according to the Genesis narrative, it happened at the Tower of Babel, when God confused the tongues of men and they were scattered due to the confusion of languages. So when he divided the nations at Babel, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. That is not how it reads in the Septuagint. This doesn't actually make sense because Israel as a nation didn't exist yet. So the Septuagint reading actually says this. So this is how it reads from the Greek translation, which predates the Masoretic text that I was just reading from. So the Hebrew text is actually what we have currently is later, much later. The Septuagint actually dates back to 250 BC. It was a translation that was commissioned by Ptolemy II of Egypt, and it was a translation that was done by 72 Jewish elders. That's why it's called the Septuagint. Septuagint in Greek means the 70. So 72 Jewish elders gathered together, and they translated the Tanakh, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, into Greek for the Greek-speaking Jews that lived in, the diaspora. So what it says here is Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. When the Most High, when God divided the nations, when he scattered the sons of Adam, again at the Tower of Babel, he set the boundaries of the nations by the number of God's angels. So they were scattered according to the number of the angels. For the Lord's portion became the people of Jacob. Now Jacob, as you remember, had his name changed to Israel. The allotment of his inheritance is Israel. So again, we have this scattering of nations, and we have this idea that they were numbered according to the angels, and that the Lord's portion, the nation that belongs to the Lord, that he chooses from amongst the nations, is Israel, and that the other nations are turned over to the angels. So these are supposed to be angels that are guardians of the peoples of the nations. And unfortunately, it seems like these angels fall and begin, instead of having worship directed towards God, end up directing worship towards themselves. And the demons take on names like Zeus and Hera and whatnot. Now that's the Christian understanding. That's what St. Justin Martyr would say in his apology. He would say that Zeus is a devil. Okay, so I'm just telling you, this is like the ancient Christian understanding and the ancient world understanding that all of the gods live in mountains or in towers, building towers, or towers on top of mountains. And in fact, when Moses receives the instructions on how to build the tabernacle, which was the place of worship for God, he received those instructions on the top of a mountain. This was in Exodus chapters 35 through 31. And then we have this interesting passage in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 13 and 14. I'll look that up real quick. Okay, so this is a famous passage from the Bible, but he's talking to the king of Tyre and comparing him to, a lot of people say Lucifer, Satan. Now it says here, it's in Ezekiel 28, verse 13, thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. So the garden, the holy garden, actually, the Garden of Eden is actually planted east. It's the garden east of Eden, if you read it in Genesis, and specifically, I think in the Septuagint. I don't know if it reads the same in the Hebrew text here, but God plants a garden. It's very important if you read it. The garden wasn't something that God created. He created Eden, and then the garden that's east of Eden, the Lord planted. So he cultivated it. Much like he made Adam from the dust of the earth, everything else he spoke into existence. But when the Lord made Adam, he actually made like a man of clay with his hands and then breathed life into it. He didn't just speak man into existence like he did everything else. It's very similar with this garden, is that the Lord planted the garden east of Eden. So it says, thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and thy pipes was prepared in thee, and the day thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth. So this is an angelic being that the Lord is speaking to here. It's an angel that's been anointed. It says that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. So I could read on with this, but the idea that Eden is actually referred to as the mountain of God. So again, we have this mountain motif where where God is identified with dwelling in a mountain. This is again going back to all these ancient texts, all these ancient worldviews. The idea is that gods live in mountains, and artificial mountains are built in order to be a dwelling place for the gods of the nations. And according to the Christians, the gods of the nations are devils. So we're getting into the Stephen King thing, and he's not really doing anything new. He's just actually borrowing an ancient worldview and putting it into the text. And I don't know where it's going. We're on this journey together. We will find out what dwells in the tower when I get to it. I'm not really looking forward to it because, again, he keeps on referring to Jesus throughout his series, and he's been doing this now for the past 3 books as the man Jesus. So he says the man Jesus and God, which doesn't make any sense because that is not Christian. That's like Manichaeanism or something, or Marcionism. Like the idea that Jesus and God are 2 different beings. Jesus is a man, yes, but we call him the anthropos. All right, the God man, the theanthropos. Theo meaning God, anthropos meaning man. Jesus Christ is the theanthropos. He's the God man. He's not just the man. Okay, that's like a Nestorian argument. So Stephen King's theology is whack. Anyways, I've gone on long enough, probably bored you to death. Most people aren't going to care about this, but the few Christians that are out there that are watching this, maybe they'll find this interesting. If you want to know more about this, I would suggest like this worldview of the Garden of Eden and man being created for it. You can read On the Mystical Life, Book 1 or Volume 1, by St. Simeon, the New Theologian. That's a good place to start. Or there is a podcast that's on Ancient Faith Radio called The Lord of Spirits. It's hosted by Father Andrew Stephen Damick, and Father Stephen D. Young. So again, the Lord of Spirits podcast, Father Andrew Stephen Damick, and Father Stephen D. Young. I don't know how many episodes they're up to now. I quit listening to that podcast a long time ago because I just don't have time for it. But they get into this ancient worldview and some what people would think weird stuff. You know, the type of stuff with the tinfoil hat people are wearing. But they actually come at this stuff from a Christian worldview and talk about ancient Christianity. Lord of Spirits podcast. All right. I got to get ready for liturgy. I got to get out of here, take my dog out, and get to church for Orthros Matins. So I'll see you all later. Hope you all have a wonderful day. God bless. Thanks for watching.